thank you very much for joining today's webinar with Mashroom. I'm Adam Mel. I've been a landlord for over a decade. I founded urban.co.uk, which was one of the first online letting agents. And now I'm with Mashroom, which is the next generation of landlord platforms. So as I said before, be sure to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and obviously join our Facebook community for landlord updates and legislation. So we do provide for free every bit of information that you're going to need being about a landlord, which is becoming ever more important, and we'll talk more about that later. So a bit about Mashroom. Essentially, we're a platform built by landlords for landlords. We've got everything you need under one roof. With us, you can market your property on Rightmove, Zoopla, find new tenants, get your contract signed, get your rent collected, store your documents, track your expenses. And you'll notice I didn't mention a price for any of that, and that's because it's all free. So how do we make our money? Well, we've got loads and loads of great insurance products, and we're also a whole of market mortgage broker as well. So that's how we make our money. So you use all our products for free, and we'd give you the odd phone call about those products. So today I'm joined by Vanessa Warwick, who you'll know from Property Tribes, in the first of a series of interactive webinars. So please do ask your questions and use the Q&A box to ask your questions. So Vanessa, please do give us a little background about yourself.
Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really delighted to be involved with this webinar series with Mashroom. Sorry, that's a good start. My phone's just gone off. It's live, of course. So yes, I have been a landlord since 1992, but I seriously started building my portfolio in 2004. And I co-founded Property Tribes in 2009, which is a landlord information and knowledge sharing platform, and the ethos is very, very similar to Mashroom, that we believe that landlord education should be free. And I'm just very, very excited to be part of this webinar, Adam, because we're going to have a little collaboration, and we're going to try and share as much of our joint knowledge as possible with everybody watching today.
We're going to talk today about three topics: Section 24, EPC upgrades, and the loss of Section 21. Then we're going to have a bit of a head-to-head on houses versus flats, and where we think you should be investing. And I think we'll probably disagree and agree a little bit on that. So we'll have a bit of a chat about that at the end. So fantastic. Let's start with Section 24. And please do remember to ask us your questions along the way, and we can try and answer as many of those as possible. So Section 24. Section 24 was announced in 2015 and came into full effect in April 2020. It basically restricts all income tax relief on property finance costs to the basic rate of 20%. So since 2020, right at the peak of the pandemic, there was a drastic reduction in the amount of tax relief us landlords received. So Vanessa, how is this affecting the market? How has it affected you, and what have you seen in the market from Section 24?
I've seen a lot of landlord pain, and I think actually there could be a kind of theme of this entire webinar, and that is pigeons coming home to roost. You've mentioned the three main topics we're going to be discussing: Section 24, tax regime, the removal of Section 21, and EPCs, and they are all having varying degrees of impact on the landlord community, and they are indeed leading to not only landlords leaving the sector, but also newcomer landlords thinking, actually, I'm not sure I want to get involved with this now. So it's all government legislation that has attempted to level the playing field, for first-time buyers, for tenants, and it's actually had a very, very bad effect. Section 24, as you say, Adam, was rolled out in 2015. It restricted how much of mortgage interest relief landlords can claim. And it's had a huge impact on landlords, particularly those in a higher rate tax bracket and those that are highly leveraged. But it's actually also pushed some landlords into a higher rate tax bracket. So landlords' margins have been slimmed at the same time as our costs are going up. So yeah, Very unpopular with the landlord community. There was a big judicial review launched, which the landlord community funded when it first came out in 2015. It's been very unpopular ever since, and it's had a devastating effect on the private rented sector and the number of homes available for tenants. And now we're seeing the fallout of all of that.
Yeah, and I am seeing, through Mashroom as well, and people I know personally, I am seeing landlords exiting the market, which is a shame, because I think the PRS sector, the private landlord sector, does provide good quality housing. When you hear about the bad quality housing and the problems with say gas safety certificates and things, very often it's social housing that is causing the problem and not the private land, because we're held to such high standards. And although you hear these horror stories, actually most of us are keeping those high standards and take pride in that. So I think it's a shame that it's kind of under attack. I know for me personally, it's changed the way I look on my portfolio. It's changed why I have my portfolio. It's less of an income thing now and more of an investment for the future for me. It's more pension rather than income now because of the tax changes. What can we do not to get around it? There's nothing that we can do to get around it, and I know there's all the companies stuff that we can do, and that's very complicated and have its downfalls with tax positions. But is there anything we can do, or anything that you do in terms of expenses that can just help ease the burden?
Well, of course. And I mean, there are many expenses that landlords can legitimately claim within their business. I mean, I'm not a tax expert, but I can talk generally about tax and say that you should claim every single thing that you're entitled to. For instance, what I've done since Section 24 came into play was I was doing it anyway, but I've kind of ramped it up a little bit. I've done kind of a rolling kind of system of repairs. I've kind of looked at each property, what state it is in, if it needs a minor refurb, a really major refurb. And I've just been upgrading my properties, claiming all the relevant expenses as much as I can. I think it's interesting, Adam, because, we've got a great disconnect with regards to Section 24 and the availability of private rented sector stock. We've got a great disconnect between central government and local government. We've got central government actively deterring landlords from investing further in the sector, forcing them to leave, and also deterring newcomer landlords from entering the sector. And then at a local level with local government, we've got the local authorities crying out for landlords to such an extent that they're offering what I call a golden hello or a golden welcome. And I've seen, figures of up to £2,500 incentive to hand your property over to the local authority. And they're not just looking for properties in their local areas. We are hearing of local authorities looking for properties all over the UK, and then tenants are being moved to somewhere that's way, out of their local support network, because the local authority are really struggling to honour their housing obligations. So it's a very, very complex scenario.
Political.
And when I always kind of refer to when I interviewed Ian Duncan-Smith at the Landlord Investment Show a few years ago, and he is very anti-Section 24, so thank you, Ian. But I said to him, just as we were walking up to the stage to do a panel debate, I said, what is your view on it? And he said, and I think he's right, he said, George Osborne tweaked too many levers without understanding what the collateral damage would be. And he's absolutely right. And now we're in the full effect of Section 24, and we're seeing that the net result is that there is less stock available. We're hearing this week of tenants over offering on what their properties for rent for, viewings lining up at 9:01 in the morning when a property's gone on the portal the night before. It's crazy out there. I've never seen anything like it in all my decades of being a landlord. And landlords are, you know, they could be becoming an endangered species, and we just don't have enough social housing to cover what's needed. So it's very, very challenging times in the private rented sector, actually, for landlords and tenants.
Yeah, and just to take your point there on stock, we've seen stock down by about 35%, and yet our time to let is under a day. So literally, we're putting private properties on, and we're seeing the inquiries come through and offers come in. People are offering on the day before they're seeing the property. Obviously, we push them to see the property, but there's a fight at the moment for property, and it's the start of, as you were saying, it's the start of the onslaught of all these government attacks on private landlords, and yet we're seeing councils, as you said, local councils, who are pushing more and more to keep tenants within the private rental sector. You know, you've even got, if someone's not paying their rent and trying to get a council house, you're seeing the council push back and insist the landlord gets a full eviction before they'll consider council housing, which is terrible, really, because so the local councils are almost going up against the private landlords as well in that way, because they have such a lack of housing on their side.
Well, exactly. And we're actually now starting to see what I would call a logjam, where tenants, you know, are wanting to move, but they can't because there's nowhere to move to. So you know, the whole system is starting to seize up. And yeah, I mean, it kind of moves on quite nicely to our next topic, Adam, because we were going to discuss Section 21 next, which is obviously another huge trending topic within the landlord community. And if we have very, very high tenant demand, then we actually going to have quite hopefully a choice of good quality tenants. And then hopefully, if we undertake our robust tenant referencing, we can minimise the necessity to have to try and gain possession of a rental property back from the tenant. So, you know, what I love about the private rented sector, and I found this in all my years of being in property, is that whenever there's, you know, the kind of grey clouds, if you look, there's very often a silver lining on the other side. So it's really important to understand our sector and don't kind of be brought down by all the kind of anti-landlord rhetoric that we see in the media.
And I think that's an important point to make, actually, because the media tends to say every time something new comes out, and I remember especially with right to rent and the deregulation, there's always there's going to be a mass exit of landlords and everything's going to be over this and you know, a catastrophe scenario, and actually it's never happened, and even now it is happening a little bit, but I don't think it will happen. Section 24 probably was the worst out of them all because it hit our pockets the hardest, and the others are more kind of legislation and dotting more I's and crossing more T's based. The media will always publish that it's going to be a catastrophe scenario, and very often it is. It doesn't deter me from keeping in the sector. I'm still very much, you know, got all my portfolio, and you just have to adjust. For me, on Section 24, it's just the way I look at my portfolio and how the finances are going to work on it. And very often it's just about adjusting your procedure and just adjusting maybe the prop tech you use, or whether you're going to use a letting agent versus are you going to do it yourself, because that will save you some money. So it's just adjusting.
It is. And I think, you know, this is where the educated landlord is going to have a distinct advantage, and this is why both myself and Mashroom are so you know, committed to property education, because you do need to understand what's going on, how it's going to impact you. In many cases, you have to future-proof against stuff that's coming down the pipe, and if you're not aware of that, then you're not going to be able to prepare for that. Ross has said an attack on landlords is an attack on tenants. Yes, ultimately, you're right, Ross, it is. Robert Fannon has asked for Section 24, is it personal landlords or corporate landlords? Section 24 24 only applies to sole trader landlords buying in their own name, and that we alluded to that it's not applicable to landlords that are bought within a company, limited company format, and indeed it's not applicable to holiday lets, which is why a lot of landlords have been looking at holiday lets, because the tax regime in holiday lets is actually very, very favourable. But that's maybe for another webinar.
Yeah, and obviously
thank you for your questions. Yeah.
You can transfer your properties into a company, but that's a whole nother webinar, and it has lots of tax risks and potential capital gains and stamp duty connotations attached to it. And obviously, you've got to finance your properties if you've got finance in them as well. So there's that's a whole nother webinar in itself. So let's talk about Section 21. So Section 21 is your no fault eviction notice. So if you want to evict a tenant, you either use Section 21 or Section 8. And Section 8, you have to have grounds for eviction, and that can be defended by the tenant. So it's a lot more difficult than Section 21. Section 21, you don't have to have a reason, and you can issue it after the fixed term of the tenancy. But you do have to have all of your paperwork in perfect order, pretty much. If there's anything with the deposit, or you haven't filed a gas safety at the right time, or even worse, if you haven't got a gas safety, in which case, you kind of deserve, then you won't be able to use it. So but it is going to go. It's the equivalent in Scotland went a few years ago now. I can't remember the date exactly. There is a few measures that are going to go in, but I don't think it's enough. There'll be some changes to Section 8, and there'll be some beefing up of the courts, so some change of the courts, some extra mediation steps. So what do you think about this, Vanessa? How do you think this will affect things?
It's going to affect things a lot, because I'll just give an example of a friend of mine. He's got a portfolio of about 100 properties. He said to me, if Section 21 goes, I'm out. And I said, why? And he said, because I have to have confidence that I can gain possession of my rental properties back. And there are many legitimate reasons why landlords would use Section 21. The most common are that the landlord wants to sell, possibly that there's antisocial behaviour involved, because Section 21 is a lot more effective and quicker than Section 8. There could be other reasons, like there's been a breach of terms and conditions of the tenancy, such as the landlord has an unauthorised pet or something of that nature. I mean, it could even be something like the landlord wants to move a family member into the property. So there's lots of legitimate reasons, but the likes of Shelter and Generation Rent and the various tenant unions, they would have you believe that landlords are serving Section 21s right, left and centre. And it's interesting, Adam, because the NRLA have written an open letter to Shelter this week complaining about their rhetoric around Section 21. They claim that landlords are using them literally willy-nilly. And in fact, the statistics show that 91% of tenancies are ended by tenants themselves. And I think it's only the minority of landlords that are somehow misusing Section 21. I do understand, because I was a tenant myself in my early 20s, I completely understand that people want to feel safe and secure in their homes, and they want to know that they can stay there as long as they wish. I support that. That's why I support longer tenancies. But, ultimately, if Section 21 goes, Section 8 is going to have to be beefed up a lot. And the detail on that is a little bit sketchy, because everything was delayed because of the pandemic. But landlords are nervous about it. Lenders are nervous about Section 21 going. They need to know that they can gain repossession of properties. So it's a very, very tricky one. And there's lots of different nuances and different knock-on effects of things, again, a bit like we were talking about with Section 24. So ultimately, it remains to be seen what's going to replace it, but there needs to be a lot more dialogue with the likes of Shelter and the NRLA and the government committees that deal with that to come up with a workable and robust solution if Section 21 does go completely.
Yeah, and look, I kind of understand, because I was a tenant about 10 years ago, and I wanted somewhere to stay for 3 years. And once I was in that place, I didn't really want to go. I wanted one place to stay for 3 years. And I did. I suppose I felt that, oh, as soon as I'm in after 6 months, I could be given 2 months' notice at any. It made you feel like you were staying somewhere temporarily. So I get that. I do understand that that's the case. But then on the flip side of that, I've never issued one. I've never had the need to issue a Section 21, and actually most of the landlords I know haven't, or not for any sort of reason where I'm issuing one just for the hell of it, because I don't like the tenant or something like that. It's not something that I've ever utilised. It's something that I feel more comfortable in what I do, because it's there. It's something that I know that's in my back pocket if I need to issue one. So it won't deter me from carrying on doing what I'm doing, but it does make me feel a little bit less comfortable, definitely.
Yes, I think you're not alone in that.
And
go on.
Sorry, and I've spoken to landlords and larger landlords mainly that think this is the start of everything going back to the old days of sort of regulated tenancies. Where I'm not sure that I'm hoping that's not the case. I'm not sure it is, but that's some people's feelings anyway.
Well, I mean, it seems counterproductive to me in a way, because as landlords, we want, as we said, we want tenants to stay put as long as possible. And, we're not going to just issue a Section 21 just on some kind of whim. So I think Shelter, their rhetoric around this is not helpful. And I'm very pleased that Ben Beadle, the CEO of the NRLA, sent such a robust response to them in respect of their claims around how landlords are using Section 21. Definitely, as I said, needs more dialogue. Landlords do have to feel confident that they can regain possession of their properties, and we shall just have to see how it all pans out. But again, this is why education and these kind of webinars are so important, so that we can keep everybody up to date with what they need to know. I mean, tenancy deposit protection came in I think 2012, yet on property tribes I still occasionally come across landlords that have never heard of it, which is quite worrying.
Well, I think there's, and maybe I was one of these landlords when I first bought my first property. There's kind of this thing, well, I'll buy a property and we just sign this AST and off we go, and there is so much more to it. There's so much more you should learn. It's not difficult, but just having that checklist of what you should and shouldn't be doing is very, very important. And let's be honest, there's sometimes that I've seen letting agents get it wrong as well. The letting agents aren't as knowledgeable as they should be. So I think, and there's this feeling as well with if you're using a letting or managing agent, that you're mitigating your risk, and actually you're not. If you are always liable yourself, no matter who else you pass on to do the job for you. You may have a claim against that person if they do something wrong, but ultimately as a landlord, you're liable.
Absolutely. And that's so important to remember, because as a landlord, even if you have a fully managed service with a letting agent, that the buck does stop with you. Very, very important to remember that nobody can divest a landlord of their legal compliance and regulatory obligations, of which there are, at the last count, over 160 government statutes and regulations that we as landlords have to adhere to.
And let's put that into context. If you've got to manage an agent and you know nothing about your properties, you know nothing about your gas safeties, they've forgotten to do your gas safety, there's a CO leak in your property, or the gas boiler blows up or something and someone's hurt, it's, yes, you can claim against that agent for negligence, but who the tenant, if they're hurt, they'll be claiming against you as a landlord. It's your responsibility. So you need to understand everything and keep on top of everything, using services like Mashroom and Property Tribes to help you understand what you and your agent should be doing if you're using them. Interesting here from Ross. We have evicted on Section 21, though it's never no fault. Usually unpayment of rent or drugs or antisocial behaviour. No fault term misleads. Well, that's, all of those reasons that you stated are you can use Section 8 to evict on, or on all of those grounds. Obviously, the tenant under Section 8 will be able to defend that. But if you've got good evidence under all of those grounds, obviously, rent is always a more difficult one and if you've got unsocial behaviour and drugs, then you'll need police reports and things like that, and the tenant will be able to defend it. But they are grounds that obviously you will still be able to evict under, but just under Section 8, not Section 21.
Yeah, and it could take a lot longer. I think it's up to a year now for a Section 28 hearing, so all the courts are very backlogged because of COVID. But I think if we row back, Adam, you know, the best way to never have to issue a Section 21 or indeed a Section 28 is never to let you know, a potentially rogue tenant into your property in the first place. And this takes us back to really robust tenant referencing. And I genuinely believe that since COVID, the risks have been significantly amplified. We are experiencing a cost of living crisis. There's affordability issues for tenants struggling and so on. And I think this is where robust tenant referencing comes in, and also things like you know, guaranteed rent insurance, which I know is a product that Mashroom offers. I think you know, for landlords going forwards, it's got to be belts and braces. Yeah.
So as you don't have the option of Section 21 anymore, it's good to have more legal cover. So again, let's go back to the Mashroom products. You've got fantastic tenant referencing that you should do whether you're with Mashroom or not, but you can do it very easy. It's £15 per tenant with Mashroom, so it's very easy and very robust and a good price. And then we've got rent guarantee insurance, which is £299 per year, and that gives you legal cover as well. So not only will you get your rent covered whilst there's an eviction going on, but you'll get all those eviction costs, which is probably the bigger part of it in the meantime. So protect yourself. Make sure you do that work. Don't rush to put a tenant in. I know when you've got a new and tenants going out and a new one coming in, and there's a void period potentially looming, which shouldn't be the case at the moment, I must admit. But if it is, it can be stressful. But it's not as stressful as going through an eviction or a bad tenant. So do that. Trust your gut. Meet your tenants. So many landlords don't like meeting your tenants, and so many. It's the reason I started the online letting agent many years ago, is because I had a letting agent who was, when it was my first property, and I said, okay, I'd like to. I've just bought this property, and it's cost me. I think it cost me £200,000 or something like that. I'm not letting someone live in my property unless I've met them. I wouldn't let them drive my car. So I'm certainly not going to let them live in my property unless I've met them. And it was so alien to them. What do you mean? That's what we're here to do. And they were really pushing me. And I did meet them. And actually, I didn't want those people to be in my property. So I think doing your due diligence, meeting your tenants, doing your referencing, trusting your gut. You know, the only problem I've ever had with a tenant, and it didn't lead to eviction, it was just bad. They just were very poor at paying their rent, and they did in the end, but it was just a constant chase all the time. I was always bottom of the pile. I knew before, my gut said no to them, and I let them in. And that really taught me a lesson, although it ended okay in the end. It was a lot of hassle, that tenancy, and I ummed and ahed before letting that tenant sign the contract, and now I absolutely trust my gut as well as all the paperwork.
Absolutely. You've got to listen to your gut instinct. It will serve you well in any business. We did have a question which I wanted to pick up on. I'm sorry, I've just lost it now because there's so many questions on the chat. It's jumping up a huge amount very quickly. Somebody was saying, you know, what about how do you end tenancies with Section 21? I appreciate that question being raised, because one of the things that I've been doing a lot of work around recently is trying to, you know, create educational awareness of the benefits of selling and buying tenanted properties. Because if you do that, it actually is what I call a triple win situation. The landlord selling wins, the landlord buying wins, and the tenant wins because they can stay in their own home. So if you are looking to sell and leave the sector, then one thing you might like to consider is selling your property tenanted. It means that you will collect rent right up to the day of completion, when the sale is completed. For the landlord buying the property, there are many advantages. You can check the payment history of the tenant. You can earn rental income from day one of ownership, and you can also meet the tenant and see how they're living in the property. And we've heard that Section 21 is one of the biggest causes of homelessness. I have to query that slightly, but I do understand that some tenants who perhaps struggle to release their deposit end up not finding somewhere else to go, and they're on somebody's sofa, and then things can spiral downhill from there. But if they were allowed to stay in their property by the buying and selling of tenanted properties, then the tenancy can be sustained and the tenancy just passes to the new landlord. So I really want to create a lot more awareness about the buying and selling of tenanted properties, because it actually benefits everybody, and particularly newbie landlords. If you're buying in an area that you don't really know, one of the best ways to mitigate your risk is to buy a property that's already tenanted. What do you think of that, Adam?
I think that's a great idea. And actually, it comes back round to the point of get really good tenants in your property and be choosy. But you do have to sell your property tenanted. You're going to need to, I would imagine, you're going to need to prove that you've got really good tenants within that property, and that there's all the checks that have been complete, and the payment history, and that they're keeping the property. Because no one's going to want to buy a property with tenants that are 3 months in arrears or not paying on a regular basis. So it comes back down to, don't rush, be choosy with your tenants, and make sure there's great tenants in your property. So you keep that asset as value as possible.
Now listen, there is one other option to Section 21. A lot of landlords don't like it, but it's worked for me, and that is to incentivize the tenant financially to leave. That will almost certainly be less expensive than trying to go through the court process. So you can come to an arrangement with your tenant, say, look, I'll write off the rent arrears, and I won't proceed with court action, but I want you to leave, and I'll pay you £500 or £250 or whatever you can agree to with them. A lot of landlords don't like that, but for my mind, I like to sleep at night. I don't want hassle. I don't want confrontation. I want to get the property back as quickly as possible, get it back up to letting standard if it's had any damage or wear and tear, and then get it rented out again and move on with, a positive new tenant in situ. So, there's always the option to financially incentivize your tenant to leave if you feel that the tenancy is broken down, the communication has broken down, and it's taking up a lot of your bandwidth in your head, because it can be very distressing and very worrying to go through these these things that occur for landlords. I remember how nervous I was when I went to my first possession hearing. I didn't really know what to expect. So yeah, just keep it simple and consider a financial incentive to get rid of a delinquent tenant.
It's really hard though, isn't it, to make a commercial decision when there's so much emotion involved. And that's what I hear from landlords mostly. It's this, but that's not right. That's not morally right. I need to fight this. I need to get the correct decision. They'll get away with it. They'll get away with with not paying me rent or with wrecking my property. You've got to remove all emotion and do your numbers. So if this tenant leaves on this date and I spend this amount getting the property back up to scratch and then let it 3 weeks later, am I going to be better off than spending, potentially, there's an unknown there, isn't it? 12 months fighting this, legal costs, more loss of rent, potentially more damage. And you've got to add those costs up. And very often you'll have to sort of swallow that bitter pill. You have to make that commercial business decision and say, actually, yes, let's offer them the incentive to go, and hope that and really hope that happens.
Well, I'm so glad you raised that, Adam, because the thing about every aspect of property is numbers never lie. Maths does not lie. A deal either stacks up or it doesn't. Numbers will always tell you the truth, provided that your inputs are correct, of course. I just want to pick up on a question by Janet Elizabeth Carter. She says you have to find an agent who will sell for you in South Devon. She's not met an agent yet who gives any kind of confidence that they can achieve a decent sale? Well, I just want to give the heads up for a platform called Vesta, which is the leading platform for buying and selling of tenanted properties. It's a prop tech solution to this problem, and I would recommend you go and check them out. I do understand what you're saying though, Janet, because when I've gone to sell a property and it's tenanted, that the agent has always said, oh, you've got to have vacant possession, you've got to have vacant possession. And I don't really understand why they can't gear up, to sell properties with tenants in situ. Ben has said he's bought loads of properties with tenants in situs, and you just need the new tenancy agreement in place on exchange dated for completion, with a clause in the contract, and notify the tenant of the new landlord. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing, Adam. One of my favourite sayings is, imagined problems always seem insurmountable, but real problems can always be solved. And if you ask the right question to the right person with a particular problem or issue you have, and you find the right support, you will find an answer to that problem. And there's so much information out there. Look at the Mashroom website, the blogs, the videos. There's property tribes. There's tons of useful stuff out there. So dive in, educate yourself, and you'll find solutions to these typical landlord problems.
And that's the absolute key point, is educating yourself. This country's PRS sector is full of people. We're all, most of us are doing something else. I was when I was in banking when I first started buying property. Most of us, it isn't the core thing that we're doing. So we're doing it because this country represents a great investment in property. So we're going above and beyond and trying to make our own lives better by making this investment, and it makes other people's lives better as well, as much as we're attacked for that. But because a lot of it it's our second thing that we're doing, we often put it in someone else's hands to understand it. And actually, there is lots of resource to enhance your understanding through people like us, Mashroom and Property Tribe. So just take that extra time. I'm preaching to the converted probably though, because the very fact that you guys are here means that you're actually doing that.
Well, that's the thing. The people on this webinar are the people that are hungry to learn, who want to treat their property portfolio as a business, who want to be professional. It's the people out there that don't wear a landlord hat, don't really think with a landlord mindset or engage on landlord communities and with landlord information. That they're the people that need the most support, and unfortunately, because of their lack of knowledge and education, they're likely to be the people that do suffer. Their risk will certainly be enhanced because of lack of knowledge and education. So everything that you do in property, you've got to think about how to mitigate your risk. When things go wrong in property, they can go wrong very quickly, and they can get very expensive very quickly. So what I try and do at Property Tribes and through these webinars is I try and help landlords go into prevention mode. That's a far better place to be than being reactive and being in cure mode, where you wait for something to go wrong and then you go, what am I going to do? Help. And then, if you're in prevention mode, you're thinking ahead to what could happen, you're mitigating risk. Your bottom line's going to be a lot better, because you're not going to suffer financial loss through lack of knowledge or not knowing how to do something properly. So landlord education going forwards is absolutely so vital when our margins are being slimmed by all these things that we're talking about.
And there's a good point by Nadine. Surely incentivizing a tenant to leave will just make them continue this behavior in the next property, as they will see it as a reward for bad behavior. But that comes down to making a commercial business decision. For you as a landlord, it could be the best decision. It's up to the next landlord to do their due diligence on that tenant, to make sure that they don't put them in their own property. And that's potentially where they're not getting their reward. It will be very hard for them to then enter into another property if a landlord's doing their proper due diligence on them. So again, I see what you mean, but you're not on a crusade for good here. You've got a business and you've got to make a commercial decision.
Yeah.
Okay.
Indeed. Well, let's
good.
jump
So
on to. Should we jump along to the EPC topic, Adam? Just looking at the time here.
We're just absolutely.
With the time.
Section 21 is always one that goes on a bit.
Somebody asked when it's going to be removed, or if it's going to be removed when. We don't actually know yet. As I mentioned, it has been delayed because of COVID. There's a lot of things going on in the background. It's still some discussion around it. So I would imagine that we'll know more in the months ahead to come, but there isn't a definite date at the moment, but it is looking very, very likely that it will go.
Okay, so EPC upgrades. This has been rumbling for some time, and while it's not yet locked in, it looks like the minimum EPC ratings for rentals will go up to grade C in December 2025, where at the moment it's rating of D. So we've got about 3.5 years to get properties up to C. So what do you think about this, Vanessa? Apart from it's another thing that we've got to contend with.
Well, it's been very much a trending topic on Property Tribes over the last year or so, I would say. More and more landlords becoming aware of it. There's many different aspects to the EPC issue. A lot of landlords think EPCs are a bit of a joke. We've got landlords on Property Tribes that have got 2 flats in the same block, exactly the same flat, and one flat's got a D and one flat's got an E. So there's that to consider. Obviously, it's looking like the end of 2025. If you don't have C and above, your property will be unlettable. You will not be able to put it on the portals unless it has a C or above. So landlords right now should be looking at their existing stock and going through all their EPC ratings to see what they are. There is the issue of the costs involved in upgrading an EPC. It can sometimes be something very simple, like low energy light bulbs, maybe a new boiler, something like that. But then in other cases, when you've got certain construction types, it can be very expensive. But landlords are going to have to grasp the nettle with this and go and look at all of their EPC ratings and think about if they're going to, or if they can afford to upgrade the property to the new requirement. A lot of landlords, again, are thinking, actually, I can't be bothered with this. I'm going to sell up. And there's another rental property that's disappeared from the market. So right now, you should be thinking about it, and you should be working out how you're going to fund these EPC upgrades, if indeed you are going to. And I would strongly recommend thinking about looking at your mortgages as well. If you've got any properties that don't have early repayment charges on them, perhaps think about doing some equity release to fund these upgrades. It's not something that you can bury your head in the sand with. You don't want to get to 2025 and then find that you've got a property that you can't let and that nobody wants to buy because it's got a poor EPC rating. Although I don't know how owner occupiers are going to feel about it, but I definitely think energy as a topic and the rising cost of energy is definitely on tenants' agendas at the moment, and rising up quite a bit on their must-haves and their wants and their needs. So yes, it's an ongoing topic. Landlords need to be aware of it, and everybody needs to do a review of their stock and see what the EPC ratings are, and then start to think about how they're going to meet this new legislation.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you there. A lot of landlords don't really think about it because it's not. Most people think about safety, don't they? And there's that sort of tangible effect of a gas boiler not being safe, or someone getting electrocuted in your property, and quite rightly so. Whereas an EPC doesn't seem so tangible as something that could get you into trouble, does it? But the fines will be there, and it's something that you have to think about, and we've got 3 years to think about it. So now's the time to do it. Now's the time to again, as you said, it comes down to your numbers. Figure out what you need to do. It's not expensive to get an EPC surveyor around to figure that out, and then cost it over 3 years and figure out if you want to meet that cost. If not, then you've got 3 years to think about disposing of the asset.
And look, let's not forget that to upgrade the EPC of a property, it's going to be roughly the same cost for a low value property, say in the north of England, as it is for a much higher value property in say London. And you know, this is why I'm always very reticent when landlords are encouraged to go and buy up north. Properties are obviously, or can be, you know, very significantly cheaper. But look, let's be honest, you know, a boiler, for instance, a new boiler, unfortunately, I've had to have 3 new boilers installed in 2022 across my portfolio, which is a big ouchie, but thankfully you can, there are some sites where you can pay monthly, which is good, so you don't have the big capital outlay. But, you know, to replace a boiler, I would say on average is about £1,750, depending on the boiler. It can be less, but let's say you've got a £100,000 property that's earning £500 a month rent, and a £400,000 property that's earning £2,000 a month rent. They're both going to have the same cost to replace the boiler. Now, if you think about it, it's going to take way longer for the cheap low value property to recoup the cost of the boiler than it is for the higher value property. And you know, this is why it's so important to kind of think about these things, and that you know, this golden ticket of rushing up north and buying all these low value properties, you know, many of them are, you know, terraced houses. There's some of them don't have cavity walls. They're, you know, just basically brick, so you're going to have problems with EPC upgrades there. You know, these are all the kind of little things that trip landlords up, because they don't think about these kind of issues. So yeah, I think it's quite interesting that higher value properties will recoup any upgrades a lot more quickly than lower value properties with lower rental income.
Yeah, and I have that argument a lot, actually. I could have 5 properties up north for the price of 2 in the south, and for me, it's a hassle thing as well. Off the topic of EPCs quickly, but you'll have 5 times the hassle, 5 times the tenants amount of tenants to find, 5 times the gas safeties. You know, it doesn't make sense to me. I think it's easier to manage 1 property than 5.
Yes, it
so,
is.
yeah,
You know, I think COVID has massively changed the game as well. And I keep saying this, but it has amplified the risks. You know, let's face it, we've had Brexit, we've had COVID, now we've got the Ukraine-Russian war. Just one of those things on their own would be, you know, a massive shock to the market. We've had 3 in a row over 2 years, 3 years. So, you know, whilst everything is very, you know, frothy at the moment, we've got rents going up, house prices going up, that's not sustainable. That run is gonna definitely come to an end. And my experience over my, you know, 20 odd years of being a landlord is that quality generally is better than quantity. And that's why I've really focused my portfolio in London and the southeast, and I've also got two South Coast holiday lets that do very well. But you know, I can speak from experience because I have got stock up north, and it doesn't perform well at all, and I found it to be a lot more hassle. And the types of tenants I've had, I had one tenant that, you know, painted a 4-bed house in Manchester fuchsia pink, even painting the radiators. I've had the police bashing down the door with the big red bumper. So, you know, these are the kind of things that affect landlords every day in their lives. It's not just you know, buy a property and rent it out and watch the rent come in. People think that's the end of the process. Actually, it's the beginning of the process, and that's why you know, updating your knowledge is so very important. I'm just mindful of the time, Adam. Should we jump across to the head-to-head now?
Yes, so we're going to do head-to-head. We'll do this at the end of every webinar that we do in our series, and today's is going to be flats versus houses. So what do you think, Vanessa? Flats or houses? What's best for you? Have you got a preference?
I have. This is quite a good topic to my mind, because a lot of landlords starting out, it's a natural question for them, and it is a good question to ask. Personally, for me, outside of London, that is my caveat, outside of London, it's freehold houses all the way. The issue with flats for me is that the service charges and the ground rent really do bite in to your cash flow. That's the main thing. But, you know, there's other things to take into consideration. You know, with a freehold house, you can force the appreciation through an extension or redevelopment or other means. You're very, very restricted what you can do with 1-bed or 2-bed flats. You can't add value to them in the same way. And obviously you've got a lease to adhere to, and some of those lease things can be quite onerous. You may have to pay for subletting. I know I do in a number of my apartments. So for me, for landlords starting out, it would be a 2 or 3 bedroomed terraced house in a good street with a good school in the area and good transport links and good leisure amenities. That would be where I would send newbie landlords all the time. But I do recognise that flats tend to be lower value. If you're on a budget, a flat might be a better option because you can't afford a house. And the other thing, Adam, is that flats will always be entry level into the market. And that means that there's always going to be very, very high demand for them. I've got a 1-bed flat in N5 in London. It's very, very small, but it's perfectly appointed. I've done it like a kind of boutique hotel. It's got parking, it's in a gated community, and it rents out all day long. It does extremely well. I don't think I can remember when it's last been empty. So like anything in property, there are pros and cons, but, you know, chew them over, try them on, see how it works for you, and come to your own conclusion. What's your view on houses versus flats, Adam?
My view, there's my personal view, which is flats, but that's very much down to the reason is I think everyone should stick to what they know, and I think that keeps you safe. All my property is in Balham and Clapham, because I know Balham and Clapham really well. I know the roads. I know exactly what to buy. I know where people want to be, and I know what kind of people are living there, and I know who I'm going to rent to, and I know why I'm going to keep on renting to them. And I don't think I've ever had a void period because of that, because I understand the rents and I understand everything about it. I like to buy flats. I like to buy flats where I've got the roof. And I know that I can get permission for the roof. So most of them I haven't done anything about that permission, but I know I can put value into that property and get, you know, some of my flats in Clapham, there's probably £800-900 a month more rent in them if I do £150,000 roof conversion.
Wow.
Which means that I know that's if I've ever got the cash to do that. That's a really good return on that £150,000. So I like to have a little bit of extra in the flat that I buy. Lynn says very loudly, houses, not leasehold, and I do understand that the leasehold and dealing out with freehold companies and things like that does make things extra complicated. So I do understand the houses, but for me it's flats all the way, and that's just because it's what I understand and what I know, and I tend to stick with that. I got seduced by student lets in Leeds by a couple of years back. I saw these big 5-bed houses with yields of ridiculous yields of 10-15% or something ridiculous like that. I'm thinking, wow, I want a bit of that. And then I started looking into it, and I just realized very quickly I don't know what I'm talking about here. And I could go and spend, you know, even though it's nothing compared to the London market, the price, I could spend a lot of money here on something I know nothing about, and I could just be in the wrong road, in the wrong place where students don't want to be, and I could end up just with an empty property. And I'm 200 miles away. So what do I do about it?
Theoretical yields.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And actual yields.
And there's lots of YouTube videos which say, you know, make all this money and do this, and this. And you've got to be very, very careful, because it might have worked for one person, but that person, well, first of all, you've got to believe it's worked for them. But you've got to really understand what you're doing. You really, really understand what you're doing. So stick to what you know. That's kind of my advice.
Well, you know, as I say, I think flats do have a place now. You've mentioned it. A friend of mine specialises in buying very large 1-bed ex-local authority flats and getting the relevant permissions to turn it into a 2-bed, and he does very well out of that. So there's always opportunity if you know where and how to look for it. I think that's a very good conclusion to everything that we've talked about this afternoon. We have got these headwinds coming our way, but most landlords are going to educate themselves and prepare for them and keep the faith with property. I know that I certainly am. I just wanted to say, Chris Stillo has said no mention of heat pumps. Well, it's a dirty word, Chris. You go onto Property Tribes, we've got endless discussions about heat pumps. You know, it's another thing that hasn't really been thought through. And yeah, there's a lot of discussion around that. And I think, again, it goes back to the government just tweaking levers, coming up with these kind of solutions that they think are the cure-all to everything. And our sector, the private rented sector, is very, very fragmented. And you tweak one thing here and it impacts something over there. And to my mind, you know, no housing minister has ever got to grips with this and seen that the helicopter view and understood how everybody is impacted within the sector with these kind of tweaks that they make. So yeah, we hope everybody's enjoyed it. We're just coming up to the end now. Adam, just remind us, there's so much that landlords can do on Mashroom, isn't there?
There is, yes. So obviously you've got, Mashroom is a platform for landlords and tenants to let and manage their property, and that's pretty much free. We charge for a gas safety or something like that, so you only pay when you have a sort of a tangible product that you need to buy. But letting the property on Rightmove, Zoopla, and contracts and things like that, that's all free, and there's brilliant technology which leads you through the process. We also do rent guarantee insurance, buildings insurance, mortgages. So we have all those products as well, and a great team on hand to help you. So please do give us a call or email us, and let us know if you need any help with that, or just join the platform, and everything you will need to know will be on the platform. So thank you very much today, Vanessa. I think it's been a great webinar. We've had over 100 questions, so sorry we haven't got to them all. Noel Charles, last comment, in London, definitely houses. So there we go.
Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. Just to mention, just as we close this out, Robert Fannon has mentioned that, you know, obviously COVID has changed people's priorities, and he is absolutely right. People are looking for more space, for a place for a home office, for a garden, for more outside space, and this has turned people against flats. I do think that's a reasonable thing to say, but then I think because we're seeing the return to work kind of trend now, or kind of the hybrid partially work from home, partially work from the office, I can see 1 and 2 bed flats becoming in very high demand as pied-à-terres. So there'll always be a way to make the most of a property, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. So brilliant. We'll be back on the 20th of May at 3 p.m. to discuss the common tax mistakes that landlords make and how you could avoid them with chartered tax advisor Simone Smith. So if you have any tax-based questions, then ask them on any of the social medias, any of the social media places that we are, in our forums, on our community, or just send us an email, and we'll try and work them into Simone's presentation. Vanessa, thank you again. Vanessa will be back with us at some point. I'm not sure when the next one is. It's probably going to be in June, but I think today's been one of the best webinars we've ever done. Certainly the most engaged with our audience. So thank you very much, and thank you all for joining, because that's the reason we're here. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'd just like to add my thanks to everybody, and I've really enjoyed your questions. We'll try and deal with some of them after the webinar as well. But just thank you for joining us, and thank you for being so engaged and for putting forward such great questions. I've really enjoyed my time on this Mashroom webinar, and I hope you have as well. And I hope to see you next time, or over on propertytribes.com.
Thanks, guys. Goodbye.
Thanks.